I want to talk about how you can get a job as an editor or a writer. Now, I don't mean the freelance kind of jobs because there's many videos on that, but I noticed that there aren't a lot of jobs on how to look for a full-time editorial or writing job with benefits and without worrying about your day-to-day. So I really mean a 9-to-5 job. And to give some background on my current position and how I got here, I graduated college in 2014. Very different time than where we're at right now. You could not work a job from home. You really had to come in full time. And I think many publishing jobs actually have stayed the same, but back then you really had to move to a city, especially New York City, to get a publishing job or a editorial job, or not just New York City, but a major city. Now this has changed, but when I describe this, I want you to just keep that in mind. After college, I moved to a major city. I got a job at a content marketing company. Now, this company was pretty predatory, and I think many of them are. There are exceptions, but for example, I had to write 4,000 words a day, and if I didn't make the mark on a certain day, I had to make up for it. And I also had to edit my work and make sure it was completely polished every single day. And needless to say, I quit after 6 months, and I didn't have another job lined up. I wouldn't recommend quitting a job without something else lined up, but this job was so miserable, I was getting heart pain as I was coming into work. My next job, I was obviously a little bit desperate for a job because I was unemployed, and I ended up getting a job as an executive assistant. I stayed at this job for 5 years. And what I did was, at any opportunity to edit or write or do any marketing work, I took it. And this means just saying you have the experience, you can do the work, and really putting yourself out there to your boss or wherever you're working, even if it's not an editorial position. And I think this is the way you can get experience. We'll talk more about this later. Eventually, I moved on to become a project coordinator. Once again, this position had nothing to do with writing or editing, and I took any opportunity I could to work on something related to writing or editing. And for one example, I worked on a project manual that I made all myself. And this came into my resume, and I started using it later to market myself. Eventually, at this position, I stayed there for 2 years, and COVID hit. I was laid off, which thankfully I had a really nice heads up before I was laid off. I applied to any position that was related to the project coordinator position or writing and editing positions. When I was at this job, I really didn't think I wanted or could write full time. My idea of what a writing job was my content marketing position, where I was writing 4,000 words a day. So I didn't want that writing life. I didn't want to write 24/7. And I was also working on my short story collection for grad school. So I was in grad school, finishing that up, and I just couldn't imagine having a job that I would feel good about doing that 24/7. But when I actually got laid off and I was unemployed, I realized that it was a really great opportunity for me to apply to jobs that I really want. So I did imagine that content marketing position, and I knew I didn't want that. But when I looked out there at the other jobs that were available, I knew that there was a lot of different things I could be doing. So I resoluted myself to applying to only jobs that I would want, and that I wanted in my future. The jobs I was applying to included jobs in marketing, which I ended up rejecting halfway through my job application journey, content marketing companies that seemed much less predatory than the one I used to work in, and editor positions for large companies, or editor positions at small presses. I also looked at internships with small presses and publications, but those are really competitive to apply to. I didn't get any callbacks for it, and they're really low in money. When I was doing these applications, I knew I was going to take a pay cut, but some of it was just not feasible. And I found that a lot of them at this time were still asking me to come into the job full time, which I really didn't want to do and found it a bit unnecessary. Keep in mind, this was a year ago now, a little over a year ago. So things have probably changed. I hope things have changed. And to be clear, this time when I was applying to jobs and I was unemployed, it was very stressful. I don't say it was an easy time, but it was a time that I wanted to take a risk to get to do something that I really wanted to do for the rest of my life or a really long time. I eventually got the position I'm in now, and this position is a full-time editor position with benefits, a decent salary, even though I did take a pay cut. And I'm working on books that I can edit myself and lay them out and print them. When I was going through the interview process, I was really, with all these positions, I was being really careful about interviewing and trying to understand what this job would look like and what the company would look like. So I have a few tips on how to get a job like the one I have, or if you're looking into content marketing or any of these other writing or editing positions, I wanted to help. Tip number 1 is think about the job that you want. Like I said, if you're interested in content marketing or if you're interested in being a full-time editor or even an assistant editor, these jobs are out there. And I find a lot of people are really afraid of taking the risk, even if they're not sure what they want to do. And I want to emphasize that jobs are not permanent. You can leave at any time. And people seem to be afraid of leaving. You know, how will it look on your resume? As someone who has interviewed people and who has been the interviewer, if you can sell yourself in the interview, it doesn't matter how long you were at the previous position. Only apply to positions that really seem like something you want to do in the long run or close to it. And even if you feel underqualified for that position, that's okay. Apply to it anyway, because often you'll get the interview if your resume looks good enough. They may say that they need 5 years of experience, but that might not be the reality for the actual position. So apply if it looks like something you want to do and go for it. There's no downside to applying for a job. Tip number 2 is use any experience you have on your resume, whether or not it's volunteer or paid, anything. So in college, I did everything I could in my extracurriculars to get writing experience, get editorial experience, and this included working on the newspaper, working for the literary magazine on campus. All of those things I would recommend up until a certain point, put them on your resume, because for this position that I'm currently in, working on InDesign was really crucial, and I did that for 2 years in college, and it was something that they like to hear. So anything related to writing, put it on your resume. And then make sure to tailor your resume with previous positions that aren't related to writing. Put in what you did, projects, anything related to writing in the description. So if you're a project coordinator, what I did was I put things that I had worked on that were relevant to the position, and at the beginning of the sentence would say, wrote a project manual, edited a project manual, something like that. And when recruiters look at your resume and maybe you don't have editor writer at the top, they'll notice that. And I would recommend branding yourself to have recruiters look at the resume and really understand what you want to be. Tip number 3 is get experience whenever you can. If you're in a job and you really don't have any projects related to writing and editing, do some volunteer work outside if you have the time. This means like you can volunteer for a nonprofit and help edit their website. You can join a literary magazine, which they're really fun and it's a really cool thing to do. Join a literary magazine as an editor or even as a reader, or just freelance on the side. You know, put yourself out there and get the money for the work you're doing. Tip number 4, rebrand yourself. I talked a little bit about this in tip number 2, but when you're restyling your resume, restyling your LinkedIn, make sure it looks like the person you want to be. So if you want to be a writer, if you want to be an editor, make that clear, and it is what you are when you put yourself out there. I don't really like LinkedIn. I don't like going on there and socializing or whatever, but I completely rebranded my LinkedIn and said I was an editorial specialist, and I showed all the experience that I had in the past, And that really helped when people were looking at me and seeing that. Same thing with your resume. If there's any positions that aren't relevant to writing, just rebrand them in the description to be experience that you can use in your next job. And tip number 5, have realistic expectations. So again, like I said earlier, when I was looking for this job, I knew I was going to take a pay cut. You might have to do that. Realistic expectations for knowing that you might not like this job, that it might not be the thing that you want if you haven't tried that before. And also realistic expectations in knowing that when you're in an interview, you're also interviewing the interviewer. So it's a two-way street. Don't just let them ask you questions, also ask them questions and ask about their expectations for the job and for you if you got this position. And that's it. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to answer. And good luck out there.